got people like Fauci saying that his lockdowns didn't cause any permanent damage to any young kids. I got news for you, it did, and we are going to reap those rewards across the whole country for years and years and years because they treated kids so poorly. And I'm just sick of seeing him. I know he says he's going to retire. Someone needs to grab that little elf and chuck him across the Potomac.
All right, that was some spicy rhetoric from Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, a potential, likely perhaps even presidential candidate in the next cycle. I agree with him that, and I criticized at least earlier this show this week, Fauci's comments saying that he didn't think it permanently harmed anyone, and that's just not true. People committed suicide. People really did suffer because not because of the disease. Some people suffered obviously because of the disease, but some people suffered more so because of the restrictions. So I take his point on that. I would not have used the words "throw him" or "kick him across the Potomac." I think.
What about the words "little elf," Robbie? Would you have used the words?
I wouldn't. Elves. Well, okay. Elves are not little. First of all,
okay.
Elves are tall.
Here comes the dungeon master.
Hundreds. They live for hundreds of years. Tolkien has set the standard for what elves are and look like. Elves are more like vampires, essentially.
Okay.
So
outside of D&D,
if you want little,
we're
talking dwarves, we're talking gnomes, we're talking various other creatures.
Okay. The point being that I think that he rightly anticipates that he's going to get, and the Republican Party can get a lot of traction out of some legitimate frustrations that a lot of parents have had over the way the shutdowns were handled. Moreover, I think that many people were pointing out in that clip that he seems to be very purposefully adopting a very Trumpian style of mannerism.
I don't quite see it. I know people are. I see that people are saying that.
Have you seen a person gesticulate
like
this other than Donald Trump?
No, you're not a hands talker.
At an angle. I'm very much a hands talker.
Not as much as me.
No, I definitely do see it, but I find it to be less effective. That's a weird kind of a thing to say. Look, I think that Donald Trump was a TV star.
What does Donald Trump do with his hands? This, right?
It is the turning of the hands. It's like this motion, which I think is very specific to him, I gotta say, and that I'm seeing from Ron DeSantis here. Many people have tried to mimic Barack Obama over the years. We've seen Beto O'Rourke do it. We've seen, Julian Castro try his hand at it. We've seen a lot of Pete Buttigieg most famously.
Let me be clear.
Is the example.
There are those who say,
and I think it doesn't work.
Yeah.
None of these people, maybe with
you got to be your own
Pete
person.
Buttigieg,
You got to be your own person.
It doesn't work, and it actually, I think, can remind people of the budget version of the original that they're actually getting. That the fact that they're not getting the real thing, and so as we see more and more of Ron DeSantis, I'll be really curious to see how public opinion shifts and how much he's able to still capture the idea that he's an inheritor of the crown of Trump, especially if Trump is inserted back into politics because he runs for office in 2024.
The most interesting thing to me about the DeSantis approach that is actually, I wouldn't even characterize this as necessarily a Trump approach. It's really being pioneered as we speak by DeSantis and his team, is how they want to handle the press. Mm-hmm. They are very consciously, Christina Pashaw is this, major press person for him. I think she was part of the governor's offices now on the campaign team. Her view and the kind of view of the team is that they speak to local media, but they're not going to, generally speaking, not going to do interviews with what they would term as hostile mainstream or progressive people and let them frame and tell their story. They don't do that. They sometimes, when they get interview requests like that, they actually just post them on Twitter and say, we're not responding to this. When their view is they're not going to play the media's game. The media doesn't get to be this, we're the media, so you have to sit down for these interviews with us where we're going to mock you and hate you and try to destroy you because we actually are on the team that's against you, but we're pretending that we're not on the other team. The DeSantis team is not going along with that fiction anymore.
I think that's smart, especially because you get your media clip and then social media takes it to another dimension and gets it where it needs to go. So all you need is the interview. You don't need it to be necessarily on CNN to get the circulation.
Right. Exactly. They're gatekeepers. They don't need the mainstream media's framing of it. They can just speak directly to the people through social media or whatever. That's the gatekeeping effect that has been eroded by social media that allows candidates.
I wish a lot of left candidates would learn that lesson. Bernie Sanders was a pioneer in some respects. He had his own radio show, and he had this kind of fireside chat style podcast before he ran in even, I think it was even predated 2016. And during the campaign, he tried to dabble in a little bit of that. I was in charge of the campaign podcast, which came out once a week. We didn't actually use it to speak directly to the public in the way that I thought that he could have. There were also a lot of live stream events that got a lot of traction. If you're one of these people who's really big on Twitter and has a big social media following, the world is your oyster. You can really sidestep a lot of these hostile environments, but most politicians, Bernie included, still choose to go into the lion's den and face Whoopi Goldberg and all of the thoughts and opinions.
It's going to be interesting if increasingly they just don't. Republicans are going to take inspiration from this DeSantis approach and do less and less of that. It's interesting. I think sometimes it can go too far, like when we talked about DeSantis turning down or not wanting to be on The View. I think, like, if I was an advisor for him, I'd say that's probably, even if they're going to over the top mock you, then they look bad and you look good. So you have to be a little bit tactical about.
And you have to know what the capacities of your principal are. Not everyone can handle that situation. For all that I don't care for his politics, I think of Pete Buttigieg, not that they would ever be hostile to him, but to the extent that they were, I think he could handle it. AOC, they were actually somewhat hostile to her on the last appearance I saw of her on there, and she handled it very deftly. She's good at talking to and working with people.
She's good.
Not everybody is like that. And I do also think there's a lot of value
Kamala
going
Harris.
into that. Exactly. And sometimes if you do go into the lion's den and they are super hostile to you and you come off as above it all, that's a huge win for you. It's a huge win for you. And we saw that with one of those early breakthrough interviews with Jordan Peterson, where he went,
yes,
remember that interview?
Absolutely.
And that woman,
so you're saying, like, women should be killed or whatever. She would just say these ridiculous things and he would respond so normal. For a long time, that made me convinced he was more normal than he actually is. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. Okay,
more Rising right after this. Stay with us.